The sound of paper slapping against glass echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. "Sign the papers." Richard Morrison, senior partner at Morrison and Associates, pushed the stack of documents across the polished mahogany table toward the small woman sitting alone on the opposite side. His $3,000 Armani suit caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and his Rolex glinted as he tapped his manicured finger on the top page. Behind him, the San Diego skyline stretched toward the Pacific, and in the distance, barely visible through the morning haze, the outline of Naval Base Coronado sat like a sleeping giant on the water. Sarah Mitchell did not reach for the papers. She sat perfectly still in her simple black dress, the fabric worn soft at the elbows, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the sharp angles of her face. The circles under her eyes told a story of sleepless nights, and her hands rested flat on the table in front of her, motionless as stone. She was 32 years old, a widow, and she was completely alone in a room full of people who wanted to take everything from her. "Did you hear me?" Morrison leaned forward, his cologne overwhelming the recycled air. "I said sign." Eleanor Mitchell shifted in her leather chair at the head of the table, her silver jewelry catching the light as she moved. At 62, David's mother carried herself with the rigid posture of old money and older grudges. She looked at Sarah the way one might examine something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Really, Richard, what did you expect?" Eleanor's voice dripped with honeyed contempt. "She's never been particularly quick on the uptake. My son, God rest his soul, always did have a weakness for charity cases." Sarah's eyes moved to Eleanor, held for a fraction of a second, then returned to the documents in front of her. Her expression revealed nothing. "Let me make this simple for you, sweetheart." Derek Mitchell rose from his seat and circled the table, his broad shoulders blocking the light as he passed behind Sarah's chair. At 38, David's older brother had the build of a man who spent too much time in the gym and not enough time achieving anything meaningful. The Army Commendation Medal pinned to his jacket caught the light as he moved, a trophy he wore to every family function like a shield against his own mediocrity. This family has a military tradition. Grandfather served in Vietnam, Dad did Desert Storm, David was a SEAL. And you? What exactly do you know about sacrifice? About service? He stopped beside her chair, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath despite the early hour. "You know how to wait tables. You know how to smile pretty. And apparently, you knew how to get my little brother to put a ring on your finger." Derek's lip curled. "But that's where your expertise ends." Sarah's fingers tapped against the table. Once, twice, 3 times. A steady rhythm, like she was counting something only she could hear. Victoria Mitchell, the youngest of the Mitchell siblings at 29, slid a photograph across the table. Her designer nails clicked against the glass surface as she pushed it towards Sarah with theatrical precision. "This is David at his funeral." Victoria's voice was sweet poison. "Notice anything interesting? Every single person in that photo is crying. His teammates, his commanding officers, his friends." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Everyone except you. You're just standing there like a statue. What kind of wife doesn't cry at her husband's funeral?" Sarah looked at the photograph. In the image, she stood ramrod straight beside the flag-draped casket, her face a mask of absolute stillness while others wept around her. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something cold and calculating, like a marksman measuring the distance to a target. Then it was gone. "I won't sign," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but somehow it cut through the heavy air of the conference room like a blade. Morrison laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "You don't have a choice, Mrs. Mitchell. These documents transfer all rights to Sergeant David Mitchell's military benefits, life insurance, and pension to his family, his real family." He emphasized the words with obvious relish. "You're entitled to a settlement of $50,000. That's more than generous, considering." "Considering what?" Sarah asked. "Considering you're nobody." Eleanor stood, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, as she approached Sarah's chair. "You were a bartender in Coronado when David met you, a pretty face serving drinks to sailors. You have no education, no family, no connections. My son made you a Mitchell, and look how you repay us. 6 months after his death, and you're still clinging to his money like a parasite." Through the glass walls of the conference room, Maria Santos paused with a tray of coffee cups in her hands. The secretary had worked at Morrison and Associates for 15 years, but something about the scene before her made her stop. It wasn't the confrontation itself. She had witnessed plenty of contentious estate meetings in her time. It was the way the young widow was standing now, having risen from her chair so smoothly that Maria almost missed the movement. The chair had slid back at a precise 45-degree angle. The woman's weight was balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet. Her shoulders were squared, her chin level, her hands loose at her sides. Maria had spent 3 years as a combat medic at Bagram Airfield. She knew that stance. She had seen it 1,000 times on soldiers preparing for action. But that made no sense. This was just a widow, a bartender, a nobody. Maria pushed through the door with the coffee, her eyes lingering on Sarah Mitchell for just a moment longer than necessary. "Your coffee, Mr. Morrison." She set the tray down on the side table, her gaze drifting to Sarah. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" "No," Sarah said. "Thank you." 2 words, polite, flat, completely devoid of emotion. Maria nodded and retreated toward the door, but not before noticing how Sarah's eyes had tracked her movement across the room without her head turning even a fraction of an inch. The widow had positioned herself with her back to the corner, with clear sightlines to both exits and the window. Maria had seen that kind of awareness before too, only in veterans, only in people who had learned the hard way that danger could come from any direction. She closed the door behind her and returned to her desk, but the image of Sarah Mitchell's eyes stayed with her, cold, calculating, nothing like the helpless widow Eleanor Mitchell described. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story and want to see exactly how Sarah turns the tables on everyone who underestimated her, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon. We post stories like this every single week, tales of hidden warriors, unexpected heroes, and moments that will leave you speechless. Do not miss what happens next. Now, back to the story. Inside the conference room, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Let me explain something to you," Morrison said, settling back in his chair with the satisfied air of a cat playing with a mouse. "You have 30 minutes to sign these documents. After that, we go to probate court. Do you know what happens in probate court, Mrs. Mitchell?" Sarah remained silent. "I'll tell you what happens. Lawyers, lots and lots of lawyers, depositions, discovery, every detail of your sad little life dragged out for public consumption." Morrison steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "The Mitchell family has resources. We have connections. We have time. Do you?" "I'm sure she doesn't even know what probate means," Victoria muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. She was examining her manicure with practiced indifference, but her eyes kept darting to Sarah, watching for a reaction that never came. Derek had resumed his circling, and Sarah's stillness as he moved behind her was almost unnatural. Most people would turn, most people would fidget. But Sarah remained motionless, though something in the set of her shoulders suggested she was tracking his movement with perfect precision. "You know what I don't understand?" Derek stopped directly behind her chair, close enough that his breath stirred the loose strands of hair at the nape of her neck. "David told us everything. He called Mom every week. He wrote letters. He shared his life with his family. But he never mentioned you. Not really, just that he'd met a girl, a waitress." The word dripped with contempt. "He never said you were special. He never said you knew anything about his world. So, what were you to him, exactly? A distraction? A warm body to come home to?" Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Derek," Eleanor said, a warning note in her voice. Not because she disapproved of the attack, but because she wanted to deliver the killing blow herself. "Let me handle this." She approached Sarah's chair and placed her hands on the armrests, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. This close, Sarah could see the expensive dental work, the subtle evidence of cosmetic procedures, the cold calculation in Eleanor's pale blue eyes. "My son was a hero," Eleanor said softly, each word precise as a scalpel. "He gave his life for this country, and you were just the woman who got lucky. You got his name, you got his ring, but you will not get his legacy. The Mitchell family has produced warriors for 3 generations. We will not let his memory be tainted by some gold-digging bartender who happened to catch his eye." Sarah met Eleanor's gaze without flinching. "David told me about you," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, steady, utterly calm. All of you. He told me about the letters and the phone calls. He told me what he shared and what he kept private. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that made Eleanor take an unconscious step backward. He told me exactly what you were allowed to know. The words hung in the air like smoke. What is that supposed to mean? Derek demanded. Sarah turned her head slightly, acknowledging him for the first time. It means he kept secrets. Everyone does, even from family. You're delusional, Victoria snapped. David shared everything with us. We were his family, his real family. Then why didn't he tell you about Kandahar? The question landed like a grenade. Morrison looked up from his phone, suddenly interested. Eleanor's perfectly composed face flickered with confusion. Derek's circling stopped abruptly. What about Kandahar? Eleanor asked, her voice sharp. Sarah turned back to face the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the morning light. Nothing. Forget I mentioned it? No. Derek grabbed the back of her chair and spun it around, forcing her to face him. What about Kandahar? David never mentioned Kandahar. He was stationed in Virginia. He did training missions, domestic operations. He wasn't deployed overseas. Sarah said nothing. Answer me, Derek growled. Still nothing. Victoria reached for her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm looking it up. Kandahar. K-A-N-D. She trailed off, her face going pale. That's Afghanistan. That's an active combat zone. Her eyes snapped to Sarah. David was never in Afghanistan. Mom, tell her. David was never in Afghanistan. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. This is ridiculous, Morrison interjected, rising from his chair. Mrs. Mitchell is clearly attempting to manipulate the situation with fabricated claims. I suggest we return to the matter at hand. The documents, the deadline, the $50,000. He checked his watch. You now have 22 minutes. Sarah's fingers resumed their steady rhythm against the armrest. 1, 2, 3, like a metronome, like a countdown. Outside the conference room, Maria Santos watched through the glass walls as she pretended to organize files. She had been trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong, that everything about this meeting was not as it appeared. The young widow sat surrounded by predators, and yet somehow she was the one who seemed dangerous. Maria's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Need background on Sarah Mitchell, former waitress Coronado. Married Sergeant David Mitchell, 2019. Anything you can find? She looked up to see Tom Bradley, the building's head of security, watching her from across the lobby. The retired Marine gave her a subtle nod, his weathered face revealing nothing, but his eyes were fixed on the conference room, with an intensity that made Maria's spine tingle. Tom had been watching Sarah Mitchell since she walked through the front doors an hour ago. Something about the way she moved, the way she scanned the lobby, the way her eyes had lingered on the emergency exits, the security cameras, the positions of every guard. He had seen that kind of awareness before, in Fallujah, in the men and women who came back different from the ones who went over. But this woman was supposed to be a civilian, a widow, a nobody. Tom picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in 3 years. Back in the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. Eleanor's composure had cracked, just slightly, and Derek was pacing like a caged animal. Victoria kept refreshing her phone, searching for information that would prove Sarah wrong, while Morrison shuffled his papers with increasing agitation. Enough games, Morrison said finally. Let's focus on facts. The facts are these. Sergeant David Mitchell died 6 months ago. His estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million, including military death benefits, life insurance, and pension. As his legal wife, you are technically entitled to a portion of this estate. The Mitchell family is generously offering you $50,000 to relinquish your claim and allow David's assets to remain with his blood relatives. He pushed a pen toward her. This is not a negotiation. This is your only option. Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear. Or fight us in court and lose everything, including what little dignity you have left. Sarah picked up the pen. For one breathless moment, everyone in the room leaned forward. Then she set it down again, placing it at a precise perpendicular angle to the document stack. I'd like to see the original beneficiary forms, she said calmly. The ones David filed with the Navy. Morrison's eye twitched. Those are confidential military documents. They're a public record for surviving spouses. Sarah's voice was mild, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. DD Form 93, Record of Emergency Data. It designates primary and secondary beneficiaries for all military death benefits. She paused. I assume you have a copy? Derek and Victoria exchanged confused looks. Eleanor's face had gone very still. How do you know that? Derek demanded. How do you know military form numbers? Sarah shrugged. David mentioned it. David would never discuss paperwork with you. He hated paperwork. Everyone knows that. Then I must have read it somewhere. Sarah's expression remained perfectly neutral. The point is, the form exists. And unless you can produce it showing someone other than me as the primary beneficiary, this meeting is premature. Morrison was already on his phone, hissing instructions to someone on the other end. Eleanor had turned away, her hand pressed to her temple. Victoria was typing furiously, and Derek stood frozen, staring at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. She's bluffing, Victoria said. She has to be bluffing. There's no way she knows. The form is designated D93, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a rhythmic, almost mechanical quality. It includes the service member's personal information, emergency contacts, and designated beneficiaries for service members' group life insurance. SGLI. Current maximum coverage is $400,000. Additionally, the form specifies recipients of unpaid pay and allowances and designates persons to receive personal effects. She met Victoria's stunned gaze. It's updated annually, or whenever there's a significant life event. Marriage, for example. The room had gone very quiet. You're lying, Eleanor whispered. You couldn't know all that. David didn't need to tell me. Sarah stood, and again the movement was so fluid that it barely registered. The DD93 is standard knowledge for anyone connected to the military. Any military spouse would know it. But you're not, Derek started. Not what? Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time, there was something sharp in her eyes, something that made Derek take an involuntary step backward. Not military, not connected, not worthy of knowing what forms my husband filed before he died. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Maria Santos chose that moment to enter with fresh coffee, providing a welcome distraction from the tension that had become almost unbearable. As she moved around the table, she noticed something she had missed before, a small scar on Sarah's right hand, running from the base of her thumb to her wrist, thin, precise, the kind of mark left by a combat knife. Maria had seen enough similar scars at Bagram to recognize it instantly. She set down the coffee cups with hands that had begun to tremble, suddenly very aware that she was standing next to someone far more dangerous than anyone in this room suspected. As Maria retreated toward the door, Victoria suddenly stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to use the restroom, she announced, gathering her purse and phone with practiced casualness. But her eyes were too bright, her movements too deliberate, and Sarah tracked her departure with the focused attention of a hunter watching prey. The door clicked shut behind Victoria. Your sister is a poor liar, Sarah said mildly. Derek's face flushed. Excuse me? She's not going to the restroom. She's going to make copies of something, or plant something. I haven't decided which yet. Sarah turned back to face the windows, presenting her back to the room in a display of either supreme confidence or profound indifference. It doesn't matter. Whatever she's planning won't work. You arrogant little... Eleanor started forward, but Morrison caught her arm. Mrs. Mitchell. The lawyer's voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I think we should take a brief recess, 15 minutes, to allow everyone to collect themselves. No, Sarah didn't turn around. Let's continue. I want to hear everything the Mitchell family has to say about me, about David, about our marriage. She paused. About what you think you know. The challenge in her words was unmistakable. Eleanor Mitchell had not become a society matriarch by backing down from challenges. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and approached Sarah's reflection in the window. Very well, Eleanor said coldly. Let's discuss what we know. We know you were working at a dive bar in Coronado when David walked in. We know you pursued him relentlessly. We know you manipulated him into a quick marriage before we could intervene. We know you isolated him from his family, convinced him to reduce his communication with us. And we know that in the 3 years of your marriage, you did nothing to support his career, his ambitions, or his legacy. Sarah's reflection showed no reaction. You were a placeholder, Eleanor continued, each word landing like a slap. Something pretty to keep him warm at night, a distraction from the serious work of being a warrior. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. My son died a hero, and you? You're just the woman who was lucky enough to be holding his hand when the end came. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Then, so quietly that Eleanor had to lean in to hear. You're right about one thing. Eleanor blinked. What? I was holding his hand when the end came. Sarah's voice was barely audible, but somehow it filled the room. 13 hours, in a hospital room in Bethesda, watching the monitors, counting his breaths, holding his hand while his brain slowly shut down from the damage he'd carried for 3 years. Eleanor stepped back as if she'd been struck. 3 years, Sarah repeated. That's how long David lived with traumatic brain injury. That's how long I took care of him. Fed him when he couldn't hold a fork, dressed him when he couldn't remember how buttons worked, held him when the nightmares came. Her reflection met Eleanor's eyes. Where were you? Where were any of you? That's... Derek's voice cracked. That's not true. David was fine. He called us. He wrote letters. He was fine. He called because I dialed the number. He wrote because I guided his hand. Sarah finally turned from the window, and her face was a mask of absolute stillness. The man you spoke to in those final years wasn't really David anymore. He was a shell, a shadow, and I spent every moment of every day trying to help him hold on to whatever pieces of himself remained. The silence that followed was suffocating. Maria Santos, who had been listening from just outside the door, felt tears streaming down her face. She had seen TBI patients at Bagram. She knew exactly what Sarah was describing, the slow erosion of personality, the confusion, the rage, the moments of heartbreaking lucidity followed by depths of despair. And she knew something else. Caring for a TBI patient was a full-time job, a brutal, exhausting, thankless job. The woman in that conference room had done it alone for 3 years, without help, without recognition, without complaint. What kind of person had that kind of strength? Inside the conference room, Victoria had returned, her face flushed with triumph. She was holding a piece of paper like a trophy. Look what I found, she announced, waving it in the air. A prenuptial agreement, signed by David and Sarah Mitchell, dated March 15, 2019. Morrison snatched the document and scanned it quickly, his face lighting up. This changes everything. According to this agreement, in the event of divorce or death, Sarah Mitchell waives all claims to the Mitchell family estate and David's military benefits. He smiled broadly. Congratulations, Mrs. Mitchell. You've just lost. Sarah didn't even look at the paper. That's a forgery, she said calmly. Excuse me? The signature is close, but not exact. David had a slight tremor in his left hand after the injury. His signatures after 2020 all show a characteristic wobble in the downstroke. That signature is too clean. She paused. Also, the date is wrong. Victoria's triumphant expression faltered. March 15th, 2019, Sarah continued. David and I were married on March 10th. On March 15th, we weren't in San Diego. She turned to face the room, and something in her eyes made everyone take an unconscious step back. We were in Kandahar province, both of us. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. That's impossible, Derek said, but his voice had lost its conviction. You're a bartender. You couldn't have been in Afghanistan. And yet, I was. Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless, utterly certain. We both were. In a place neither of us was supposed to be, doing things that will never appear in any official record. She looked at Victoria, who was clutching the forged document like a lifeline. Would you like me to tell you exactly where in Kandahar, what sector, what coordinates, because I remember every detail of that day, every single second. Victoria's hand began to shake. Outside the conference room, Tom Bradley ended his phone call and stood very still for a long moment, staring at the small woman behind the glass. The voice on the other end had told him things that made no sense, things that changed everything. He had asked for information on Sarah Mitchell, widow, former bartender. What he got was something else entirely. Holy Mother of... he whispered, then cut himself off. He looked at Maria Santos, who was watching him with wide eyes. We need to make some calls. Right now. Back inside, Morrison had recovered his composure. Whatever games you're playing, Mrs. Mitchell, they won't work. This agreement may or may not be valid, but the fact remains that you have no power here. The Mitchell family controls the narrative. We control the resources. We control the outcome. He checked his watch again. You have 7 minutes to sign. After that, we pursue every legal avenue available. We will drag your name through the courts. We will expose every secret you're trying to hide. We will make your life a living nightmare. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. Is that what you want? Sarah considered the question for what seemed like a very long time. Then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that everyone else in the room had yet to discover. No, she said quietly. What I want is much simpler than that. Then sign the papers and take the money. That's not what I want either. Sarah picked up the forged prenup, examined it briefly, and set it aside. What I want is for someone, anyone in this family to prove that they were worthy of David, that they understood him, that they cared about him as a person, not as a symbol. We loved him, Eleanor protested. You loved the idea of him, the uniform, the medals, the stories you could tell at cocktail parties. Sarah's voice was quiet but relentless. But David, the real David, the man who cried during sad movies, the one who fed stray cats, the one who woke up screaming at 3 a.m. because he couldn't forget the faces of people he'd lost. She shook her head. You didn't know him at all. The silence stretched. This is absurd, Morrison finally said, though his voice had lost its edge. We're getting nowhere. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm giving you one final opportunity to... The door to the conference room swung open. Tom Bradley stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. Behind him, the elevator doors were just closing, and through the lobby windows, Sarah could see 3 black SUVs pulling into the parking lot below. I apologize for the interruption, Tom said, but he wasn't looking at Morrison. He was looking at Sarah. But there's someone here who needs to speak with you. All of you. Morrison rose to his feet, outraged. This is a private meeting. You can't just... With respect, sir. Tom's voice cut through the objection like a blade. You're going to want to hear what's coming next. He stepped aside. And into the conference room walked Admiral James Harrison. We're about to reach the moment everything changes. But first, if this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Your likes help us create more stories about unsung heroes who refuse to be broken. And if you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the family. Now let us see what Sarah does next. The Admiral was in full dress uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals that caught the light as he moved. 3 silver stars, a Navy cross, combat action ribbons from conflicts that had never made the news. His white hair was cropped military short, and his bearing was that of a man who had commanded warriors into battle and brought them home again. He was not alone. 2 naval officers flanked him, their faces impassive, their hands clasped behind their backs. They positioned themselves on either side of the door like sentries. The effect on the room was immediate and profound. Morrison's face drained of color. Derek straightened instinctively, years of military academy training overriding his shock. Victoria dropped her forged document, her hands flying to cover her mouth. And Eleanor stared at the Admiral as if she were seeing a ghost. James, she breathed, what are you doing here? Eleanor. The Admiral's voice was deep, resonant, filled with an authority that decades of command had refined to a razor's edge. We need to talk. He turned to face Sarah. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city below. Then Admiral James Harrison did something that none of them expected. He raised his right hand to his brow in a formal military salute. Chief, he said quietly, it's been too long. Sarah's posture shifted. The vulnerable widow vanished like morning mist, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone who stood taller, someone whose eyes held a depth of experience that no bartender could possibly possess. Admiral. Her voice was different too, stronger, more certain. Permission to speak freely? Granted. These people forged a prenuptial agreement to steal David's benefits. They've spent the last hour insulting his memory and threatening his widow. A pause. I thought you should know. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Morrison stepped forward, his lawyer's instincts overriding his shock. Now, wait just a minute. I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing here, but this is a private legal matter. You have no jurisdiction over Richard Morrison. The Admiral didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Class of 1985, University of San Diego Law School. 3 ethics violations, all settled out of court. Current investigation pending with the California State Bar regarding predatory estate practices. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I know exactly who you are, the Admiral continued. I know who everyone in this room is. I know what you've done, what you're trying to do, and I know why it's going to fail. He turned back to face the Mitchell family, and something in his expression made even Eleanor shrink back. You want to know who Sarah Mitchell is? Fine. Let me tell you. He moved to stand beside Sarah, and the contrast between them was striking. The towering Admiral in his decorated uniform, the small woman in her simple black dress. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, call sign, Wraith. 847 days deployed in active combat zones, 3 silver stars for valor under fire. The first woman ever to complete the DevGru Sniper qualification program. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek's voice cracked. That's not possible. She's a bartender. She's one of the most decorated snipers in SEAL Team 6 history. The Admiral's voice was hard as steel. She served 17 missions that will never appear in any public record. She saved lives that you will never know about. And 3 years ago, in a village outside Kandahar, she carried your brother 12 miles through enemy territory after an ambush that killed 4 of her teammates. Victoria made a small, strangled sound. The injury that eventually killed David wasn't from combat. It was from the extraction. The Admiral's voice softened, just slightly. Sarah was wounded carrying him. She took fire and kept moving. She kept him alive for 19 hours until the extraction team could reach them. He paused. And then she married him. And she spent the next 3 years caring for him, watching the man she loved slowly fade away, all while people like you dismissed her as nothing. Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair, her face chalk white. I don't, she whispered. We didn't know. He never told us. Why didn't he tell us? Sarah answered, her voice quiet but steady. Because he asked me not to. She met Eleanor's eyes. David wanted to be the hero in your eyes. He wanted to be the one who protected people, who saved lives. He didn't want you to know that I was the one who carried him home. He didn't want you to know that his wife was better at his job than he was. The words were gentle, but they landed like hammer blows. He loved you, Sarah continued. All of you, even when you were cruel, even when you ignored me, even when you made it clear that I would never be good enough. Her voice caught just for a moment. He loved you, and he wanted to protect your image of him, so I let him. I stayed in the shadows. I played the role of the quiet wife, and I never told anyone who I really was. Derek had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Victoria was crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. Morrison had retreated to the far corner of the room, desperately trying to make himself invisible. And Eleanor was staring at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. The phone calls, Eleanor said slowly. The letters, you said you helped him write them. I did. But some of those letters, they talked about classified things, operational details, things David couldn't have known unless... Eleanor's voice trailed off as the realization hit her. You wrote them. You were the one who knew those things, not David. David remembered pieces, fragments. I filled in the gaps. Sarah's expression was infinitely sad. I made him sound like the man he used to be, the man he wanted you to remember. Oh God, Eleanor's voice broke. Oh God, what have we done? The Admiral stepped forward. What you've done is attempt to defraud a decorated combat veteran out of her rightful benefits. What you've done is forge legal documents, harass a grieving widow, and desecrate the memory of a man who died in service to his country. His voice hardened. But what happens next is up to Sarah. Every eye in the room turned to her. Sarah looked at Eleanor, at Derek, at Victoria. She looked at the forged prenup lying on the table. She looked at Morrison cowering in the corner. and she looked at the Admiral, who waited patiently for her decision. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said finally. "I came here to find out if there was anything worth saving. Any piece of this family that deserved David's love." Silence. "I watched your son die, Eleanor." I held his hand while his heart stopped beating. And in his final moment of clarity, do you know what he said? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He said, "Tell them I love them. Tell them I'm sorry I couldn't be everything they wanted." Eleanor's face crumpled. "He died thinking he had disappointed you. He died thinking he wasn't good enough." Sarah's voice hardened. "And you came here today to steal from his widow, to call her names, to take away the last thing he gave her." She shook her head. "David deserved better, from all of you." Derek stood abruptly, his military instincts finally overriding his pride. He faced Sarah and, with visible effort, raised his hand in a salute. "Chief!" His voice was rough with emotion. "I apologize for everything. I had no right." He couldn't finish. Sarah returned the salute with parade ground precision. "At ease, Derek." He lowered his hand, tears streaming down his face. Victoria approached next, her designer makeup ruined, her expensive dress wrinkled from where she'd been clutching herself in shock. "I forged that document," she confessed. "I found David's old signature on a birthday card and I copied it. I thought if we could just prove you were—" She couldn't finish. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She reached for the forged prenup, tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the ground like confetti. "It's worthless anyway," Victoria said brokenly, "just like everything I've done today." Eleanor remained seated, her hands trembling in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I spent 30 years being proud of my son. 30 years telling everyone about his service, his sacrifice, his dedication." She looked up at Sarah with eyes red from unshed tears. "And I never once asked him if he was happy. I never asked about you. I never tried to understand what his life was really like." She rose slowly from her chair, moving towards Sarah with the careful steps of someone approaching a sacred space. "You carried him home," Eleanor whispered. "You literally carried my son home. And I called you a gold digger. I called you a parasite. I said—" Her voice broke. "Oh, what I said to you." She stopped in front of Sarah, and for a long moment, neither woman moved. Then Eleanor Mitchell, society matriarch, mother of a hero, did something she had not done in 20 years. She knelt. "Forgive me," she said. "Please, I know I don't deserve it. I know nothing I say can undo what I've done. But please, please forgive me." Sarah looked down at the woman who had tormented her for the past hour. The woman who had called her worthless, unworthy, insignificant. The woman who had tried to steal her husband's legacy. And she reached down and took Eleanor's hands. "Get up," Sarah said quietly. "David wouldn't want you on your knees." Eleanor stood, her legs unsteady, her face wet with tears. "He loved you," Sarah repeated. "No matter what, he loved you. And I will not dishonor his memory by carrying hatred in my heart." She paused. "But this family needs to change, starting now." The Admiral stepped forward. "Sarah has agreed to establish a foundation in David's name, support for veterans with traumatic brain injuries and their families." He looked at the assembled Mitchells. "I would suggest that this family find a way to contribute meaningfully to that foundation, as a start." Morrison finally found his voice. "I'll handle all the legal work pro bono, every document, every filing, everything the foundation needs." He swallowed hard. "And I'll resign from this firm. I've been doing this kind of work for too long. It's time to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place." No one objected. Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway again, his expression grave. "Ma'am, there's one more thing. Something that came through while you were talking?" He held up his phone. "It's about David's last mission, the one he was investigating before he died." Sarah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "What about it?" "We found the file, hidden in his personal effects at the base." Tom hesitated. "There's a photograph and a note. I think you need to see it." The Admiral nodded. "Let's step out into the hallway. This may be sensitive." Sarah followed him through the door, leaving behind a conference room full of broken people slowly beginning to reassemble themselves. Maria Santos handed tissues to Victoria. Derek helped his mother to a chair. Even Morrison had emerged from his corner, his arrogance replaced by something that might eventually become humility. In the hallway, the Admiral reached into his briefcase and produced a black envelope. Sarah recognized the classification markings immediately. Eyes only. Compartmentalized. The kind of document that officially didn't exist. David was asking questions before he died, the Admiral said quietly. Questions about an operation in Kabul, 2018. Something happened there, something that wasn't in any official report. Sarah took the envelope. Inside was a photograph, faded and worn, showing 4 figures standing in front of a demolished building. Sarah recognized herself immediately, younger, harder, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much. Beside her stood David, before the injury, before the slow decline. Between them was a woman whose face had been deliberately obscured, and clinging to the woman's hand was a child. A girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair and large, frightened eyes. On the back of the photograph, in David's careful handwriting, Kabul 2018, find her. Do you know who she is? The Admiral asked. The woman? The child? Sarah stared at the photograph for a long time. The woman was an asset, a local interpreter who helped us navigate the tribal politics. She had information about a weapons network that was smuggling arms to terrorist cells across the region. Sarah's voice was distant, remembering. Her name was Farida, and the girl... She trailed off. The girl is her daughter. We were supposed to extract them both, get them to safety before the network realized they had been compromised. Sarah closed her eyes. But something went wrong. There was an ambush. We got separated. By the time we fought our way back, Farida and the child were gone. Gone? Vanished. We searched for 3 weeks. Nothing. Command eventually declared them lost and recalled us to base. Sarah opened her eyes, and they were hard as granite. I never believed she was dead. Neither did David. He kept searching, even after we came home, even after his injury. He was convinced they were still out there. The Admiral nodded slowly. Then, you need to see this. He handed her his phone. On the screen was a message sent to a secure naval intelligence server just 3 hours ago. The sender was anonymous. The content was brief. If you want to find Farida and the girl, come to the following coordinates. Come alone. Tell no one. Or they die. Below the message was a set of GPS coordinates, somewhere in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. It came through David's old secure account, the Admiral said. Someone has been monitoring it, waiting for someone to reactivate it, someone who knew David was investigating, someone who wanted to make contact. Sarah's jaw tightened. This could be a trap. Almost certainly. The coordinates are in Taliban territory. Yes. Going there alone would be suicide. For most people. The Admiral's eyes met hers. But you're not most people. You're Wraith. Sarah looked back at the conference room, where Eleanor Mitchell was embracing her children, where the first fragile steps toward healing were being taken. She thought of David, of his obsession with finding Farida and the girl, of the way he had clung to that mission even as his mind crumbled. And she thought of the small, frightened girl in the photograph, who would be 12 or 13 now if she was still alive. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. The Admiral took back his phone. But Sarah, whatever you decide, you won't be alone. There are people who owe you their lives, people who would follow you into fire without a second thought. He paused. If you call, they will come. Sarah nodded slowly. I know. She turned to walk back to the conference room, but the Admiral's voice stopped her. One more thing. She turned. David's last words, the ones you told Eleanor about. Tell them I love them. Tell them I'm sorry. The Admiral's voice was soft. Those weren't his last words, were they? Sarah was silent for a long moment. No, she admitted. His real last words were for me. Only for me. What did he say? Sarah's eyes went distant, looking at something far beyond the walls of the office building. He said, Find her, Sarah. Find the girl. She's the key to everything. The Admiral nodded slowly. Then you know what you have to do. Yes. Sarah's voice was firm, resolved, the voice of Wraith, not Sarah. I know exactly what I have to do. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered without hesitation. Yes? A young woman's voice, trembling, terrified, speaking rapid English with an Afghan accent. "Are you Wraith? Please, you have to be Wraith. My father said if anything happened to him, I should find Wraith. He said you would help. He said you were the only one who could save us." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Where are you?" "I'm in the United States. They brought me here 3 months ago. But they found us. They found my mother. They—" The voice broke into sobs. "Please, please help us. You're our only hope." Sarah looked back at the conference room one final time. At the Mitchells, finally beginning to understand what they had lost. At Maria Santos and Tom Bradley, who had recognized something in her that even she had tried to hide. Then she turned toward the window, toward the distant shape of Coronado Base gleaming in the morning light. "Tell me where you are," Sarah said, her voice steady as stone. "I'm coming to get you." The voice on the other end gave an address. Local. Less than 20 minutes away. Sarah ended the call and turned to face the Admiral. "I need a team," she said. "Something small, unofficial, people I can trust." The Admiral was already reaching for his phone. "I'll make the calls." "And Admiral—" Sarah paused at the elevator doors. "Thank you for coming today, for everything." "Don't thank me yet." The Admiral's face was grim. "If this is what I think it is, the hard part is just beginning." The elevator doors opened and Sarah stepped inside. As they closed, she caught one last glimpse of the conference room where the Mitchell family was beginning the long, painful process of rebuilding everything they had broken. But Sarah's mind was already elsewhere, on a little girl in a photograph, on a voice trembling with fear, on a mission that David had never been able to complete. The elevator descended and Wraith rose. The black SUV cut through the San Diego morning traffic with surgical precision. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her simple black dress now covered by a tactical jacket that Tom Bradley had produced from the trunk of his personal vehicle. In the back seat, the Admiral was on his third phone call, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that revealed nothing to anyone who might be listening. Maria Santos had insisted on coming. "I was a combat medic," she had said, her jaw set with determination. "If there are injuries, you'll need me." No one had argued. Tom Bradley drove with the focused intensity of a man who had spent 20 years navigating hostile territory. His Marine training had never fully left him, and now, behind the wheel of this civilian vehicle, he moved with the same purpose he had once brought to convoys in Fallujah. "The address is a warehouse district," Tom said, his eyes never leaving the road. "Industrial area, mostly abandoned since the shipping company went under in 2020. Perfect place to hide someone you don't want found." Sarah checked the sidearm the Admiral had handed her before they left. Standard Navy issue. Familiar weight. Familiar balance. It had been 3 years since she had held a weapon with intent, but her hands remembered everything. "How many hostiles are we expecting?" she asked. "Unknown." The Admiral ended his call and leaned forward between the seats. "But I've got a team en route, former DevGru operators. They'll establish a perimeter and wait for your signal." "Former. Retired. Officially." The Admiral's expression was grim. "Unofficially, they've been running private security operations for the past 2 years. Good men, men who owe you their lives." Sarah nodded slowly. "Who?" "Jackson, Martinez, Chen, O'Brien." 4 names, 4 faces flashed through Sarah's memory. 4 men she had served with in operations that would never appear in any official record. 4 men who had watched her carry David Mitchell through 12 miles of enemy territory. "They'll be there," the Admiral confirmed. "Whatever you need." The SUV turned onto a deserted industrial road, passing rusted fences and abandoned loading docks. Graffiti covered the concrete walls of empty buildings, and broken windows stared down like hollow eyes. This was a place that had been forgotten, left to rot while the city grew around it. "There." Tom pointed to a warehouse at the end of the road. Unlike its neighbors, this building showed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud, a padlock that gleamed in the morning light, curtains drawn across the few intact windows. "Stop here," Sarah said. 200 meters out. We go the rest on foot." The SUV rolled to a silent stop behind a rusted shipping container. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, adjusting gear, communicating through hand signals rather than words. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Come alone, back entrance. 3 minutes. She showed the message to the Admiral. It's a trap, he said flatly. Probably. Sarah was already moving toward the warehouse. But that girl is in there, and I'm not leaving her behind. Sarah? She turned, and for just a moment, the mask of Wraith slipped, revealing the woman beneath. The widow, the caregiver, the person who had spent 3 years watching the man she loved fade away. David died trying to find her. He spent his last coherent months obsessing over that photograph, over the mission we couldn't complete. Her voice was quiet but fierce. If she's still alive, I'm bringing her home, no matter what. The Admiral held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Jackson and Martinez are approaching from the north. Chen and O'Brien are covering the south. We'll have eyes on every exit. He handed her a small earpiece. You won't be alone in there. Sarah fitted the device into her ear and heard the familiar crackle of tactical communications. Wraith, this is Jackson. We're in position. Say the word and we breach. Hold position, Sarah responded. I'm going in first. If you hear shots, that's your green light. Copy that. Be careful in there, Chief. We just got you back. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Then she moved. She crossed the 200 meters to the warehouse in under 90 seconds, using every piece of cover the abandoned industrial park provided. Rusted vehicles, collapsed fencing, shadows that pooled between buildings like dark water. Her body remembered this work, even if her conscious mind had tried to forget. The way to move without sound. The way to breathe without disturbing the air. The way to become invisible in plain sight. The back entrance was a heavy steel door, scarred by years of neglect, but recently oiled. The hinges wouldn't squeak. Someone had prepared this space for exactly this kind of meeting. Sarah pressed her back against the wall beside the door and listened. Voices, at least 3 distinct speakers, male, speaking in Pashto, the language of Eastern Afghanistan, and beneath their conversation, the soft sound of crying, a woman's voice muffled as if gagged or restrained. Sarah's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to the Admiral. 3 hostiles minimum, at least 1 hostage, possibly 2. Going in. The response came immediately. Understood, we're with you. Sarah took a deep breath. Then she opened the door. The interior of the warehouse was a study in contrasts. The main floor was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned industrial space, rusted equipment, scattered debris, the smell of mold and decay. But in the center of the room, someone had constructed a crude living space. Blankets on the floor, a camping stove, bottles of water, and chairs. 3 chairs, 2 were occupied. The first held a woman in her late 30s, her face bruised and swollen, her hands bound behind her back. Despite the violence done to her, Sarah recognized her immediately. Farida. Older now, the years had carved lines of hardship into her features, but the same fierce intelligence burned in her dark eyes. The second chair held a teenage girl, maybe 13 or 14, with the same dark hair and large, frightened eyes as the child in the photograph. She was not bound, but the way she sat, rigid with terror, suggested restraints were unnecessary. Fear held her more effectively than any rope. The third chair was empty. You came. The voice came from the shadows behind the hostages. A man emerged, tall and lean, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in the mountains. He wore civilian clothes, but his bearing was military. His eyes never stopped moving, assessing, calculating. I came, Sarah agreed. Her voice was calm, conversational, as if they were meeting for coffee. Now let them go. The man laughed. It's not that simple, Wraith. He pronounced her call sign with obvious relish. You killed 17 of my men in Kandahar. You destroyed a weapons network that took 10 years to build. You cost my organization millions of dollars and decades of planning. He stepped closer to Farida, his hand resting on her shoulder, in a gesture that was almost gentle. And then you vanished, retired to America to play housewife. We couldn't find you, couldn't touch you, until David Mitchell started asking questions, until he reactivated old accounts, old networks, old debts. The man smiled. Your husband led us right to you, Wraith. His love for this woman and her child made him careless, and his carelessness made him dead. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, something cold, something dangerous. You killed David? Not directly, but we made sure certain information reached certain people, people who knew about his injury, people who knew he was vulnerable. The man shrugged. The brain is a fragile thing. A few carefully placed suggestions, a few triggers planted in his environment. His mind did the rest. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she absorbed it, channeled it, transformed it into something she could use. Why? Because he wouldn't stop looking. Because he was getting close to finding Farida. Because he was going to expose everything. The man's voice hardened. We needed him to stop, and we needed leverage against you in case you ever decided to come out of retirement. He gestured at the bound woman and terrified girl. And now, we have it. Sarah's hand rested on the grip of her weapon, but she didn't draw. Not yet. What do you want? What I've always wanted. The names, the locations, the identities of every asset, every operative, every contact you developed during your years with DevGru. The man's smile widened. You have information in that head of yours that could cripple American intelligence operations for a generation. I want all of it. And if I refuse? The man drew a knife from his belt and pressed it against Farida's throat. Then I start cutting, starting with her, ending with the girl, and you get to watch every moment. The girl, Zara, let out a small cry of terror. She's just a child, Sarah said. Whatever happened between us, she had nothing to do with it. She's leverage. That's all that matters. The man pressed the blade deeper, and a thin line of red appeared on Farida's neck. The name's Wraith. Now. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The man was standing behind Farida, using her as a shield. The other two hostiles were somewhere in the building, probably covering the exits. She had maybe a 60% chance of drawing and firing before he could slit Farida's throat. Not good enough. But there was another option. All right, she said. I'll give you what you want. The man's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Just like that? Just like that. Sarah reached slowly for her earpiece, making sure he could see the movement. I'm going to remove this and set it on the ground. Then we can talk. Privately. She pulled out the earpiece and placed it carefully on the concrete floor. Then she took 3 steps to the left, positioning herself between the man and the far exit. The names you want? They're not in my head. They're in a secure database, encrypted. I can access it remotely, but I need a computer, something connected to the internet. The man considered this for a long moment. There's a laptop in the office, upstairs. He jerked his chin toward a metal staircase in the corner of the warehouse. We'll go together. The woman and the girl stay here with my men. No. Sarah's voice was flat. They come with us, all of us, or there's no deal. You're not in a position to make demands. Neither are you. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. You need what's in my head. You can't torture it out of me because the database requires biometric authentication. If I die, the information dies with me. So we do this my way, or we don't do it at all. The standoff stretched for an agonizing moment. Then the man smiled. I always heard you were clever. He removed the knife from Farida's throat and stepped back. Fine, everyone moves together. But know this, if you try anything, the girl dies first. Understood? Understood. The man barked orders in Pashto, and 2 more figures emerged from the shadows. They were younger, harder, with the cold eyes of men who had grown up knowing nothing but violence. One of them roughly pulled Farida to her feet, while the other grabbed Zara's arm. Upstairs, the man commanded. Slowly. They moved as a group toward the metal staircase, Sarah leading the way. As she climbed, she let her eyes adjust to the changing light levels, cataloging every detail of the space. The office was at the top of the stairs, a small room with windows overlooking the warehouse floor. Perfect sight lines. Perfect ambush position. She smiled internally. In here. The man pushed open the office door and gestured for Sarah to enter first. The room was exactly as she'd expected. A battered desk, a laptop, older model but functional. Dusty windows with a clear view of the entire warehouse below. And most importantly, a single entrance. The computer, Sarah said, approaching the desk. I'll need a few minutes to establish a secure connection. You have 2 minutes. Sarah sat down at the laptop and began typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. To the casual observer, she appeared to be accessing some kind of encrypted database, entering complex passwords and navigating through layers of security protocols. In reality, she was sending a message, a simple text, routed through 3 different servers to mask its origin, arriving on the Admiral's phone less than 30 seconds after she hit send. Upstairs office. 4 hostiles including leader. Hostages secured but mobile. Breach on my signal. Signal will be lights. The Admiral's response came as a single character. K. Sarah continued her pretend work on the computer, buying time, letting the tension in the room ratchet up another notch. The 2 younger men had positioned themselves by the door, their weapons drawn. Farida and Zara were huddled together near the wall, the mother's arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. And the leader stood directly behind Sarah's chair, close enough that she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. 1 minute, he warned. Almost there. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. The encryption is more complex than I remembered. Cold War-era protocols. It takes time. You're stalling. I'm working. She didn't look up. You want results, or do you want speed? You can't have both. The man's hand closed on her shoulder, his grip painfully tight. 30 seconds. Sarah's finger hovered over the enter key. The information you want is about to appear on this screen. Names, locations, active operations. Everything I know about American intelligence networks in the Middle East and Central Asia. She paused, letting the anticipation build. Are you ready? The man leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen. Show me. Sarah pressed the key. The screen went black, and every light in the warehouse went out simultaneously. In the sudden darkness, Sarah moved. Her hand shot up, catching the man's wrist and twisting with brutal efficiency. She heard bones crack, heard his scream of pain, felt him stagger backward as she ripped free from his grip. By the time his weapon hit the floor, she already had her own sidearm drawn and aimed at his chest. Down! She shouted, and Farida dropped instantly, pulling Zara beneath her, shielding the girl with her own body. The 2 guards fired blindly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes providing brief, strobing illumination. But they were panicked, disoriented, shooting at shadows. Sarah was neither. She moved through the chaos like water, each motion precise, economical, deadly. 2 shots, 2 impacts, 2 bodies hitting the floor. The leader was scrambling for his fallen weapon when Sarah's boot caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. She was on him before he could recover, her knee on his chest, her weapon pressed against his forehead. Who sent you? Her voice was ice. You'll never know. He was laughing despite the pain. Kill me if you want. There are others, hundreds of others. This network is bigger than you can imagine. Bigger than your government. Bigger than... Sarah? The Admiral's voice came from somewhere below. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, the sound of multiple footsteps on the metal stairs. We're clear up here, Sarah called back. 4 hostiles down, hostages secure. The office door burst open and Jackson was the first through, his weapon sweeping the room with professional precision. Behind him came Martinez, Chen, and O'Brien, each taking a sector, each confirming the threat had been neutralized. Status? Jackson asked. Leader's alive. I want him talking. Sarah rose from the man's chest, but kept her weapon trained on his face. Get him restrained, and get these women out of here. Martinez and Chen moved to comply, while O'Brien helped Farida and Zara to their feet. You're safe now, O'Brien said gently to the girl. No one's going to hurt you anymore. Zara stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Is it really over? She whispered. Sarah holstered her weapon and approached the girl slowly, crouching down to meet her eyes. It's over, she said. I promise. You're safe. Zara's composure finally broke. She lunged forward, throwing her arms around Sarah's neck, sobbing into her shoulder with the desperate relief of someone who had given up hope and found it again. Sarah held her, this child she had never met but had been searching for across years and continents, this girl that David had sacrificed everything to find. Thank you, Farida said, her voice hoarse from the gag they had finally removed. Thank you for coming, for not giving up. I made a promise. Sarah met her eyes over Zara's shaking form. A long time ago. I don't break promises. The Admiral appeared in the doorway, surveying the scene with practiced efficiency. Local law enforcement is 10 minutes out. We need to sanitize this location before they arrive. His eyes fell on the restrained leader, who was now secured with zip ties and bleeding from his broken wrist. Is he cooperative? Not yet. Sarah released Zara and rose to her feet. But he will be. She crossed to where the man lay, looking down at him with an expression that made even the hardened DevCrew operators shift uncomfortably. You said you killed my husband. Her voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. You said you manipulated his mind, used his injury against him, drove him to an early grave. Is that true? The man spat at her feet. He was weak, broken. He would have died anyway. Sarah crouched beside him. Maybe. She picked up his fallen knife and examined it in the dim light filtering through the dusty windows. But you made it worse. You made him suffer more than he had to. You took away time we could have had together. She turned the blade slowly, letting the metal catch what little light there was. That was a mistake. What are you going to do? Torture me? The man laughed, but there was an edge of fear in it now. You're American military. You have rules, regulations, you can't... I'm not military anymore. Sarah's voice was silk over steel. I'm just a widow with a knife and a lot of questions. And right now, in this room, there are no rules, no regulations. No one to stop me from taking as long as I need to get answers. She leaned closer. So, let me ask you again. Who sent you? Who is behind this network? And how deep does it go? The man's bravado cracked. 3 hours later, Sarah emerged from the warehouse into the bright California sunshine. Farida and Zara had been transported to a secure location where Maria Santos was treating their injuries and a trauma counselor was standing by. The leader and his surviving associate were in federal custody, having provided enough information to keep multiple intelligence agencies busy for months. The Admiral was waiting beside his SUV, his phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call as Sarah approached. Initial reports suggest this network has tendrils in 6 countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and, here, domestic operations, sleeper cells, the whole picture. He studied her face. You did good work today, Sarah. David would be proud. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She stood looking back at the warehouse, at the building where she had finally completed the mission her husband had died trying to finish. It's not over, she said finally. No, it's not. But this is a start. Sarah nodded slowly. The girl, Zara, she mentioned her father, the man who told her to find Wraith if anything happened. She turned to face the Admiral. She said he knew you, that he worked with American forces, that he had information about something big. The Admiral's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Her father? Farida's husband, a former Afghan intelligence officer who defected to help us track weapons networks in the region. Sarah's eyes narrowed. You know something about him? Something you haven't told me. The Admiral was silent for a long moment. His name was Ahmad Shah, codename Oracle. He was one of our most valuable assets in Afghanistan for nearly 15 years. He provided intelligence that saved hundreds of American lives. He paused. He was also the one who first identified the network you just dismantled. He spent years gathering evidence, building cases, documenting everything. And when they finally caught up to him, what happened? They made an example of him, publicly, brutally. Then they went after his family. The Admiral's voice was heavy with regret. We tried to extract Farida and Zara, but the operation failed. They vanished. We assumed they were dead. They survived. Obviously. The Admiral looked at Sarah with something approaching wonder. And somehow, against all odds, they found you. The one person in the world who might be able to help them. Sarah absorbed this information in silence. Oracle's intelligence, the evidence he gathered. Where is it now? That's the question, isn't it? The Admiral reached into his briefcase and produced another envelope. This was delivered to my office this morning. No return address, no fingerprints, just this. Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers and letters, coordinates, account numbers, encryption keys, and at the bottom, 3 words. She knows everything. Sarah looked up sharply. Zara? Her father spent 13 years teaching her, training her, preparing her for the day when he might not be there to protect his family. The Admiral's voice was grave. That little girl has information in her head that could expose corruption at the highest levels of multiple governments. She knows the names of every major player in the international arms trade. She knows about secret agreements, hidden alliances, cover-ups that would shake the foundations of geopolitics. And the network knows this. They've known for years. That's why they've been hunting her. That's why they took such extreme measures to find you. The Admiral met her eyes. Zara wasn't just leverage, Sarah. She was the target all along. You were just the key to reaching her. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Then this isn't over, not by a long shot. No, it's just beginning. The Admiral closed his briefcase. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Sarah looked at the coordinates on the paper, at the encryption keys that could unlock secrets buried for over a decade, at the 3 words that changed everything. She knows everything. I need to talk to Zara, Sarah said. I need to understand exactly what her father taught her. And then, Sarah's jaw set with familiar determination. And then, I finish what he started. The drive back to the secure location took 20 minutes. Sarah spent most of it in silence, staring out the window at the passing cityscape, while her mind worked through possibilities, strategies, contingencies. David had died for this. He had spent his last coherent months chasing shadows, following threads that led deeper and deeper into a web of corruption and violence. He had known somehow that Zara was the key, that everything depended on finding her, protecting her, unleashing the knowledge her father had given her. And now that burden had passed to Sarah. She thought about the Mitchell family, about Eleanor's tear-stained face as she had finally understood what Sarah had sacrificed, about Derek's salute, trembling but genuine, about Victoria's confession and Morrison's promise of redemption. They were broken people beginning to heal. It would take time. It would take patience. But for the first time in 3 years, Sarah believed that something good might come from all that pain. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tom Bradley. Mitchell family has established a fund in David's name. Initial contribution, $200,000. Eleanor personally, more coming. Sarah smiled despite everything. Good, she typed back. That's a start. The secure location turned out to be a nondescript house in a quiet residential neighborhood. Federal marshals guarded the perimeter, and inside, a small team of specialists was already at work documenting Farida's testimony and cataloging the information Zara had begun to share. Maria Santos met Sarah at the door. They're doing better than expected, Maria reported. Farida has some minor injuries, but nothing serious. Zara is... She hesitated. Remarkable. She's been through things no child should ever experience, but she's holding together. More than holding together. She's been asking for you? For me? She says you're the one her father told her about. The ghost. The woman who carries heroes home. Maria's eyes were bright with emotion. She said she knew you would come. Sarah followed Maria into the house, past the marshals and the analysts, to a small bedroom at the back. Zara sat on the edge of the bed, her mother beside her, both of them looking up as Sarah entered. Chief Mitchell. Zara's voice was stronger now, steadier. Thank you for saving us. I made a promise. Sarah sat down in a chair across from them. A long time ago, your father helped me save someone I loved. I owed him a debt. He spoke about you often. Farida's voice was warm despite the trauma she had endured. He called you the best America had to offer, a warrior with a conscience. He said if anything ever happened to him, you were the one person he trusted to protect us. Sarah felt the weight of that trust settle onto her shoulders. Tell me what you know, she said to Zara. Everything your father taught you. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Zara exchanged a look with her mother, then took a deep breath. My father called it the ledger. It's a record of every transaction, every deal, every agreement made by the network over the past 20 years. Names, dates, amounts, evidence of corruption at the highest levels. She paused. He spent his entire career gathering this information, piece by piece, transaction by transaction, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Why didn't he go public sooner? Because the network reaches everywhere, into governments, into intelligence agencies, into the media. Zara's young face was grave beyond her years. My father knew that if he released the ledger without proper preparation, it would be buried, discredited, he would be killed, and nothing would change. So he hid it. Yes, in pieces, encrypted fragments scattered across secure servers around the world. No single piece is useful alone. But together, Zara tapped her temple. I'm the key. I know how to access each fragment, how to assemble them, how to decrypt the final document. Sarah leaned forward. And the network knows this? They suspected. That's why they kept hunting us. That's why they couldn't just kill us outright. Zara's voice hardened. They needed me alive. They needed to extract the information. But my father prepared me for that too. How? The girl smiled, and for a moment she looked decades older than her 13 years. He taught me to resist. He taught me to hide the truth inside lies. He taught me to wait for the right moment, for the right person. Her eyes met Sarah's. For you. Sarah sat back in her chair, processing everything she had heard. The coordinates in the envelope, the encryption keys. Those are the first pieces? The beginning, my father's insurance policy. Zara produced a small pendant from beneath her shirt, a simple silver disc on a chain. This contains the algorithm needed to begin the assembly process. The rest, she tapped her head again, the rest is in here. A lifetime of preparation, a generation of sacrifice, all leading to this moment. Farida reached for her daughter's hand. Ahmad knew he wouldn't live to see this through. He accepted that years ago, but he believed, with all his heart, that the truth would eventually come out, that someone would be brave enough to carry his work to completion. She looked at Sarah. He believed in you. Sarah stood and walked to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to fade toward evening. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and peaceful, utterly at odds with the weight of what she had just learned. A network spanning continents, corruption reaching the highest levels of power, a ledger that could expose it all, and a 13-year-old girl who held the key to everything. I need to make some calls, Sarah said finally. The people I trust, the people who can help make sure this information reaches the right hands. How do you know who to trust? Zara asked. My father spent years wondering the same thing. Sarah turned from the window. I don't know for certain. No one ever does. She met the girl's eyes. But I know this. There are good people in this world. People who believe in justice, in truth, in doing the right thing even when it costs them everything. I've fought beside them. I've bled beside them. I've buried some of them. She paused. Your father was one of those people. David was another. And I have to believe that there are more, enough to make a difference, enough to change things. Zara considered this for a long moment. My father said something similar. He said that darkness only wins when good people stop fighting. She stood, squaring her shoulders with a determination that belied her youth. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. If you're ready to fight, Chief Mitchell, then so am I. Sarah looked at this child who had been forced to grow up too fast, who had lost her father and nearly lost everything else, who still found the courage to stand and face whatever came next. Call me Sarah, she said. And yes, I'm ready. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of secure meetings, encrypted communications, and careful planning. Sarah assembled a team of people she trusted absolutely, veterans of conflicts both public and classified, analysts with unblemished records, journalists with reputations for integrity. The Admiral provided resources and cover, ensuring that the operation remained invisible to the network's eyes and ears. Tom Bradley coordinated security. Maria Santos monitored Farida and Zara's health, both physical and psychological, and one by one, the fragments of Ahmad Shah's ledger began to come together. Each piece revealed new horrors, arms deals that had prolonged conflicts for decades, bribes that had corrupted governments from within, assassinations disguised as accidents, information sold to the highest bidder, regardless of the cost in human lives. The picture that emerged was staggering in its scope and devastating in its implications. But it was also undeniable. Ahmad Shah had been meticulous. Every transaction was documented. Every name was verified through multiple sources. Every claim was supported by evidence that would hold up in any court, any investigation, any tribunal. By the end of the 3rd week, they were ready. The release was coordinated across multiple platforms simultaneously. Major newspapers in 12 countries, television networks on 4 continents, secure uploads to servers that could not be compromised or taken down. Within hours, the ledger was everywhere. The aftermath was seismic. Government officials resigned in disgrace. Corporate executives were arrested. Intelligence agencies launched internal investigations. Congressional hearings were convened. United Nations tribunals were scheduled. The network that had operated in shadows for 2 decades suddenly found itself exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. And at the center of it all, protected by layers of security and surrounded by people who would give their lives to keep her safe, Zara watched her father's legacy finally come to fruition. "He would be proud," Sarah said, standing beside the girl as they watched the news coverage unfold. "So proud." Zara wiped tears from her eyes. "I wish he could see this. He can." Sarah put her arm around the girl's shoulders. "Wherever he is, whatever comes after this life, he knows, he sees, and he's proud." 3 months later, Sarah stood at David's grave on a crisp autumn morning. The headstone was simple, unadorned, exactly as he would have wanted. Sergeant David Mitchell, beloved son, devoted husband, American hero. She had added the last part herself, not because he needed the validation, but because she wanted the world to know. "I finished it," she said quietly to the granite marker. "Everything you started, everything you sacrificed for. It's done." A breeze rustled through the trees of the military cemetery, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of a flag snapping in the wind. Zara is safe. Farida is rebuilding her life. The network is broken, really broken this time. Your family, Sarah smiled. Your family is actually trying. Eleanor established a foundation in your name. Derek went back to school, studying to become a counselor for veterans with TBI. Victoria volunteers at the VA hospital 3 times a week. Even Morrison turned into a halfway decent human being. She knelt beside the grave, placing her hand flat against the cold stone. "I miss you, every day, every hour. That will never change." Her voice caught. "But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. And I think you knew that. I think that's why you could let go. Because you knew I was strong enough to carry on without you." What an incredible journey. If this story moved you, drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Was it the reveal? The Admiral's salute? Eleanor's face? We read every single comment. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit that bell, because next week's story might be even more explosive. Thank you for watching.